Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 736 for October 28th, 2018. Coming up in just a few minutes.
Well, I think the most important thing he said is enjoy it. He was an absolute whiskey aficionado, and learn to trust your own palate. Don't believe what you're told. Believe what you taste. Believe what you smell. And if you like it, then it's good whiskey.
That's Rebecca Jago, the co-managing director of the Last Drop Distillers, talking about her father, Tom Jago, one of the legendary whiskey and spirits blenders and innovators. Tom died earlier this month at the age of 93, but Rebecca brought a special whiskey to this week's Walpole Luxury Showcase in New York City. Tom's Blend number 1. More with Rebecca Jago later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. And we'll also catch up with Louise McGuane of Ireland's Chapelgate Whiskey Company, who was also at the Walpole Showcase. That's just ahead, along with the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and much more. All on this edition of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
As always, let's start off with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And by the time you're hearing this, we should know what Great Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer has in store for the UK's whisky industry. Philip Hammond will unveil the coalition government's new budget Monday in Parliament, and it's likely to include a tax increase on whiskies and other spirits that could be as much as 3.4%, if it's linked to the rate of inflation. The Scotch Whisky Association and other industry groups have been pushing for a second consecutive year of tax freezes on spirits. But as the SWA's Graham Littlejohn told us, a reading of the tea leaves does not look good.
Some of the soundings we've had from members of Parliament and others in government departments is that there's a pretty hard pushback on our call for a freeze this year. There's financial pressures on the government. They've pledged additional money for the National Health Service. They've got Brexit to deal with, of course, and I think there's a reticence to freezing duty on Scotch whisky and other alcoholic products this year.
The SWA's case is that raising duties on whiskey and other spirits actually leads to reduced government revenue because of lower sales. The association cites the government's own data showing that this year's freeze resulted in a 9% increase in tax revenue from spirits between February and August. Taxes already make up about 74% of the price of an average bottle of whiskey in the UK. We'll have the details and reaction in the news section at whiskycast.com after the announcement, and more coverage on our next episode. Meanwhile, there's an update to report in the long-running dispute between liquor regulators in British Columbia and the 4 Scotch Malt Whisky Society partner bars in the province. Last January, provincial inspectors raided Fett's Whiskey Kitchen in Vancouver, the Grand Hotel in Nanaimo, and Victoria's Little Jumbo and the Union Club. They seized all of the society's bottles from each bar, citing a violation of the province's regulations that require bars and restaurants to buy all of their alcohol directly from the British Columbia Liquor Distribution Branch. The government agency does not carry the society's whiskies, so the bars purchased them through the 2 liquor stores in the province that sell them to society members. This week, Fett's owners Eric and Allura Fergie posted on the bar's website that the province offered them a deal to settle the case, but that it did not include the return of around $40,000 worth of their seized whiskies. They plan to take the case to an enforcement hearing at some point next year on the grounds that the inspectors should have produced a seizure warrant when they raided the bar. They also want to make the case that the government should allow bars and restaurants to be able to buy from private retailers. That is one of the recommendations in a report from a provincial review panel earlier this year. The report was submitted to British Columbia Attorney General David Eby back at the end of April. A spokesman for the Ministry of the Attorney General told us in an email that the findings in that report are still being reviewed, but until any changes are made, all licensees must comply with the current law. He declined to comment specifically on the Scotch Malt Whisky Society case, citing a policy against discussing pending enforcement and compliance actions. Eric and Allura Fergie at FETS have not yet responded to our request for an interview. Let's talk about new whiskeys now. And if you have ever complained about a rare whiskey being sold for a high price automatically, well, the folks at Dewar's would like to have a word with you. Their new Craigellachie single malt is 51 years old. And the price? It's free, if you're in the right place at the right time. There will be special tastings in 4 key markets around the world over the next year, starting at Milroy's of Soho in London, November 26th through the 28th. 150 tickets will be given away for tastings at the Bar 51 pop-up bar, starting this Monday through the Craigellachie website. The pop-up bar will also appear in Australia, South Africa, and the U.S. over the next year. So why give it away? Quoting directly from the Craigellachie news release, this whiskey has been resting in oak for 51 years. It doesn't need to sit on a shelf for another 51 years, gathering dust. You may have tried single-grain Scotch whiskies from the North British Grain Distillery in Edinburgh before, but the distillery has never released its own bottling until now. North British is owned by Diageo and Edrington in a joint venture, and the distillery worked with Douglas Lang and Company to release a 58-year-old single-cask bottling from 1960. It may well be the oldest single-grain bottling on record anywhere in Scotland. Only 222 bottles will be available in the UK. The recommended retail price is around £1,700 each. That's about $2,180 at current exchange rates. The Balvenie is releasing chapter number 4 of Maltmaster David Stewart's DCS Compendium series. This year's edition is named Expecting the Unexpected, and the Balvenie's Lorne Cousin gives us a preview.
Expecting the unexpected is literally as it sounds. This is whiskey which David has been storing away secretly, as is his wont and as he likes to do. Things which you might not expect to come out of Balvenie, perhaps, or even from Speyside. We had a 1971 European Oak Oloroso Sherry Butt. We had a 1982 European Oak Oloroso Sherry Hogshead, which, as you know, is very unusual to have a sherry European Oak Hogshead. 1992 European Oak Oloroso Sherry Puncheon. Wow, even cooler. 1999, a refill American Oak Hogshead, and then a 2009 first fill American Oak Bourbon Barrel. So something for everyone there, but it's amazing that these types of casks exist, and we've had them at Balvenie for some time.
How does he manage to keep these casks hidden away in the distillery so that nobody else pulls them out and blends them away?
I know that it's a great secret. We have Warehouse 24, as you know, which is this beautiful, dark, old dunnage warehouse where we do keep our special whiskies. But remember also in the old days, whiskey records, even going back to the 60s and 70s, weren't great. So David probably had a lot of these in his personal notebook. Nowadays, of course, everything is on bar chart and distilleries know where their whiskey is. But in the old days, there was a lot of things hidden away and things we didn't know about. So who knows, maybe he found something.
And he's not saying, is he? Because obviously the excise folks would love to know about this stuff, right?
Oh, it's all above board, of course, but he found something within the bonded warehouse.
The 5 malts in each chapter are only sold as a complete set. Chapter 4's limited number of sets will be available for around $40,000 each. 3 years ago, Ireland's Teeling Whiskey Company fired up its stills and started making whiskey in Dublin for the first time since the old Powers Johns Lane distillery closed back in 1976. Now Teeling's first bottling of its own whiskey has been released, and founder Jack Teeling couldn't be happier.
There's no better enjoyment than actually seeing bottled whiskey that you've distilled, matured, and now bottled come to life. So it's been great. It's been, let's say, we've come full circle. It's the completion of the original vision, and it's a day just to stand back and celebrate.
Let's talk about the whiskey. This is a single pot still, right?
Yeah. So when we set up in Dublin, we wanted our first distillate to be inspired by the old distilleries that went before us, and we've used an old Dublin mash bill of 50% unmalted barley and 50% malted barley, distilled 3 times to be our inaugural launch from our new distillery.
This first release will be available only in Ireland with a recommended retail price of €55 each. That's around $63. It follows a special charity bottling of 100 bottles that were auctioned off to raise money for local charities. Bottle number 1 went for £10,000, while the other bottles sold for an average of around £600 each, for a total in the neighborhood of around £70,000.
We're going through the vetting process, but part of our ethos from day one is every person who comes through the visitor centre, we allocate a small percentage of the take. We put it into a bucket, and we dole that out every year to different charities. So we're expanding on that. There's a couple of very good local charities that are helping younger children, hopefully to try and break the poverty cycle and make it easier for them to get onto third level education and just create safe havens for them. We're going to put a higher percentage of allocation into that. So before the end of the year, we'll have clear visibility on where all the funds have gone.
One other note, Jack ran in Sunday's Dublin Marathon and set a personal best time of 3 hours even. We'll have tasting notes for that debut release soon at WhiskyCast.com. And this next story is not about a new whiskey. Powers 3 Swallow came out several years ago as an Ireland-only release from Irish distillers. And on a personal note, this is one that I've been grabbing at the Dublin airport on almost every visit I make to Ireland. It's now finally being sold outside of Ireland for the first time and is slowly making its way into U.S. retailers. There are several origin stories to the 3 Swallow name, but they represent the 3 birds on each bottle of Powers. It's selling now in the U.S. with a recommended retail price of around $47.95 a bottle. You'll find my tasting notes for it at the WhiskyCast website. Spoiler alert, I like it. Maker's Mark is getting back into the 101 proof whiskey business. Veteran Maker's Mark fans might remember the old Gold Wax limited edition bottles at 50.5% ABV that are now collector's items. But this one is a new version that started out as a distillery exclusive. It'll only be available in the travel retail market and will carry a recommended retail price of around $50 for a 1-liter bottle. It's the first time Maker's Mark has released a travel retail exclusive. Finally, if you've been on social media for any length of time, you've probably seen someone post those old photos of whiskey vending machines from many, many years ago. While vending machines for whiskey are still popular in Japan, one is coming to London. The Drinks Business reports Thomas Ask and Tristan Stevenson of Whisky Me and the Black Rock Whiskey Bar in London have installed a vending machine outside their bar in the Napoleon Hotel. It'll only be in place through the end of December and will sell 5 CL pouches of single malt whiskies for £7.95 each. That's around $10.20 U.S. As for the responsibility concerns about selling whiskey in a vending machine, well, the machine will only accept special tokens that are only sold at the hotel's Devil's Darling Bar after 5 p.m. each day. It's a start, though. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. It's not too soon to start thinking about the holidays. Want to make an impression? Give that special person a bottle of Highland Park's classic Viking Pride 18-year-old single malt. It's been regarded as one of the world's best whiskeys for years now, and it's a gift they'll never forget. Check out the entire range at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. The Oslo Whiskey Festival is coming up this Friday and Saturday, November 2nd and 3rd in Norway. Along with Whiskey Fest San Francisco on Friday night, Whiskies of the World in Atlanta on Saturday, and Whiskey Live China in Changsha on the 3rd and 4th. The Chicago Whiskey Jubilee is November 8th, and I hope you'll join us for special coverage from the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick, November 13th through the 17th. Tickets are still available. The Whiskey Exchange hosts its 2018 Whiskey of the Year selection tasting at its Covent Garden store in London, November 19th. Whiskey Live Dublin is November 23rd and 24th, and the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City, New Jersey, hosts its American Craft Whiskey Revival Night, November 24th. Finally, Whiskey Fest New York is coming up on December 4th. Right now, we have 156 different whiskeys on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival, a tasting, or any other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form on the website to let us know about it, and we'll add it to our list.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. Aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up. Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. While we may think of whiskey as a basic part of our lives, there's no argument that whiskeys are becoming thought of in the same way as other luxury goods. Walpole is the group that promotes the UK's luxury brands worldwide, and this week it held its annual trade mission and press showcase event in New York City. And whiskey had a presence alongside the fashion designers, jewelers, and perfumers. For instance, Glenmorangie was showing off one of the $5,500 handmade surfboards made with staves from its barrels, and Royal Salute from Chivas also had a presence. But at one of the prime spots in the center of the room, I caught up with Rebecca Jago from the Last Drop Distillers. Her father, longtime drinks industry veteran Tom Jago, co-founded The Last Drop back in 2007 with his longtime colleague James Espey as the final act in their careers. Rebecca and James's daughter Beanie run the company now, a year or so after it was acquired by Sazerac. Tom died back on October 12th at the age of 93, and here's a sign of just how influential he was as a whiskey blender and spirits innovator. This week, the New York Times published an obituary for him. When I ran into Rebecca at the Walpole showcase, the first thing she said was, "You've got to see this." And she showed me a special whiskey decanter they had made up for the blend that honors her father. We're going to post a video of this on the WhiskyCast website and our social media feeds, because words just don't do it justice.
Tell me about this first of all, this bartending device, this pourer, but also the whiskey, because this one was very special to your dad, right?
It was absolutely super special. So in 2018, it was our 10th anniversary of the formation of the Last Drop. And for our 10th anniversary, we decided both to celebrate with a number of events and to create a house blend that we would create in homage to Tom, who drinks a glass of whiskey or drank a glass of whiskey every single night at 6 o'clock. So we spent a lot of time talking to him about what he looked for in a great blend, since he's a complete advocate of the blend. And then we asked Last Distillers in Scotland to create something in that profile. So it's over 50% malt and the rest is grains. Obviously a lot of it's Speyside influence, quite a lot of sherry and just the slightest wisp of smoke from Islay, which he was very sad. He never got to Islay because the weather was always against him. So we created Tom's Blend as a tribute to my father, but also as something that the Last Drop could use at events and as a gift for people, where we could be much more generous than we can when we pour the Last Drop. The Last Drop is very limited in quantity, and every drop we pour is a drop we can't sell. So we feel we can be much, much more generous with Tom's Blend, but also feel that whilst it doesn't detract from what we're doing at the Last Drop, it's also a really fine blended Scotch whisky that's a great example of what an 18-year-old blend can be like. Then, because we were celebrating our 10th anniversary, we went to a company in Brighton called Guinea Pig Global and asked them to create a very special decanter for us, which became the focal point of our events in London. And into it we poured Tom's Blend and allow people to have this amazing experience of watching this extraordinary device fill up and tip over like a bird and pour a pre-programmed measure into a glass for you, so that there's a lot of theatre and a lot of magic, which I think is all around Scotch whisky anyway.
Did your dad ever get to see this in action?
Yes, he did. I'm delighted to say, as you know, my dad died a couple of weeks ago, but he was around during May and he came to a couple of our events. I took him in one Sunday when it was quiet to show him how it all worked, and then he came to one of our lunchtime events, and he and James talked a lot about their lives and the business together, and he really enjoyed a dram and was able to say how proud he was of what we're doing, and particularly how proud he was to have Tom's Blend. And we promised him a lifetime supply.
Might this ever actually be sold at some point?
Well, if you look at the label, which obviously you can't on a radio cast, but if you look at the label, we've called it Tom's Blend No. 1. And the whole point about that is that Tom's Blend No. 1 will never be for sale. It's for our friends and our customers and people who come and see us. But there might be Tom's Blend No. 2, and that might be something we could commercialise. Or there might be James Blend No. 1, which might be a different sort of whisky with a different sort of profile. So we've opened a window, and we haven't gone through it yet, but we're certainly thinking about how we might, without in any way detracting from what we set out to do with the Last Drop.
Where does the company go from here? Obviously, you became part of Sazerac a while back, and that's moving along well. But will it always be an ultra-premium, ultra-rare brand, or can you do things like Tom's Blend and make it more accessible to we mere mortals out there?
I think that's a really, really interesting question, and it's something we ask ourselves a lot. I think that the most palpable benefit of being part of Sazerac is obviously having the support of this incredible company and the visionary leadership there. But also, obviously, they have enabled us to do a lot more in the way of laying down stock for the future, because they have much deeper pockets than we had when we were an independent company. And what we are now doing is really examining the options for diffusion ranges, for lower price points that don't detract from what we do at the Last Drop, but might introduce us to a younger, less affluent audience who might aspire to the Last Drop but want to join us on the journey as they grow to a point where the Last Drop is what they want to drink. And we absolutely appreciate that the Last Drop is not an everyday drink. It's a special drink for a special occasion. But we want people to know about us and to love what we do. So I think the principles remain the same, whether it's a bespoke blend or a younger single cask. It's still got to have all the hallmarks of something really exceptional. And it's lovely to hear people say that they love Tom's blend, perhaps in a different way from the way they love the single malt from 1967 or the 1971 blend, but they still appreciate that it's a really fantastic example of what it is. And I think that there is space for us to move into a younger market with the same hallmarks.
Let's talk about this 1971 that's just now becoming available in the States. At least what few bottles of it are available still. Give me the details on this one.
This is the most lovely story because it's a blended Scotch whisky, which is, I think you know, is absolutely the bedrock of the company. We started with 1,347 bottles of a 1960 blended Scotch whisky, and the 1971 is our fifth blend and our largest release to date by a few more bottles. But it has a really magical story behind it. It started life in bourbon barrels and was bottled as a 12-year-old premium whisky. And when they'd fulfilled that order, they put the remaining blend back into sherry wood, where it stayed for another 9 years before they then bottled another parcel as a 21-year-old premium blend. And then the rest, what was left, went back into second fill bourbon barrels. So it's had this triple maturation in three distinctly different woods, and that gives us this incredibly layered and complex flavour profile. You really do sort of find yourself going through from the start of the bourbon through all this sort of stone fruit and fig and a bit of leather when you get to the sherry, and then these incredibly vanilla-y, toasty top notes that just gives it so much complexity, such fascination, and it's a really beautifully balanced, long-lasting dram. So it's our biggest release to date, 1,352 bottles worldwide. I think there are fewer than 400 came to the US, and there's certainly not 400 left. As with everything we've ever done, you get a miniature with the full-size bottle, and that means you can either choose to keep the miniature as a souvenir or drink that and save the bottle for a special occasion. But we're very proud of the way we present our products, and I think this is it's our 11th release. It's another example of exactly what we pride ourselves on, which is small parcels of really exceptional spirits.
One final question. What's the best lesson your dad ever taught you about whiskey?
My dad, what's the best question he ever taught me about whiskey? He said, well, I think the most important thing he said is enjoy it. He was an absolute whiskey aficionado, and learn to trust your own palate. Don't believe what you're told, believe what you taste, believe what you smell, and if you like it, then it's good whiskey. But he was the nose behind the original release, and he said to his dying day that the 1960 blended Scotch whisky was the best whisky he'd ever tasted, and if he could drink that forevermore, that would be his dram of choice. And that has really informed how I've gone on the journey with the Last Drop, because I've tasted the 1960s, so I know what that hallmark is, and I think we're all really proud to say that all our releases since, they may not be the same, but they have the same hallmarks of quality and uniqueness.
By the way, the partnership between the Last Drop and Sazerac will result in the newest Last Drop release. Their first bourbon will be unveiled later this week. Just 45 bottles will be available, and as for the price, that has not been disclosed yet. About 20 feet or so away from the Last Drop's stand, Louise McGuane was showing off the J.J. Corry whiskies from her Chapelgate Whisky Company in County Clare, Ireland. The first J.J. Corry expression, the Gale, received rave reviews when it came out earlier this year. And last week, the newest release, the 16-year-old Flintlock Irish Single Malt, was named Best Irish Single Malt 13 years or older at the Irish Whisky Awards.
I think it was a very big deal for us. I think it's a big deal. It's a good thing for the industry, specifically because, you know, we're a very small indie. There's only a couple of people working in the business. And as a teeny tiny company, we source our whiskey. We do that transparently. I think it's really great to be able to blend a whiskey, create a single malt that's kind of going up against the big boys and the big multinationals who make amazing whiskey. So to be put into that sort of category and win under blind tasting is huge, huge, huge for us. So we're really excited.
And let's talk about the story, because behind every good whiskey there's a good story, and you've got a story with this one.
I do have a story. So we renovated our tasting room, which is the original house on the farm. My grandmother's family would have lived there pre-famine. It's very, very old, the actual building itself. And when we were renovating the roof, the thatched roof, we were changing it over to slate. And in the corner of the roof, we found hidden away, plastered away, a flintlock pistol and a tin of ammunition, of buckshot ammunition. So we had it dated, and the pistol comes from about the 1790s. That was a time of very there was a lot of freedom fighting going on. There was a particular spate of freedom fighting going on in our location at that time. I still have the pistol, so I decided to call the single malt the Flintlock in honour of that. So it kind of means to me like we have a really big independent spirit that's always mattered around us, and it's the Flintlock.
Where is it available?
It's going to be made available in the USA. It's very limited edition. It's just 3 casks that are blended together, so I'm only going to get a couple of 100 bottles out of it. It's shipping in November. It will be made available here. It'll be on caskers.com, I think, and also it'll be on allocation in New York, the state. We'll be in Massachusetts. We'll be in Connecticut. We'll be in Georgia and Tennessee as well, but in limited quantities. If people want to get their hands on it, I would go into the retailer and make a request.
But what about the rest of the world? I mean, Ireland, I'm assuming, has it.
Ireland, UK, Germany, and that's it.
Who has it in Ireland?
Celtic Whisky Shop, who will ship internationally to all of you, and the Whisky Exchange will have it out of the UK as well, who will also ship.
They won't have it at the airport yet, will they?
Maybe. I doubt it. It probably won't make it to the airport. It's already sold. I've already pre-sold it. It's gone. So the airport didn't order it, so they're not getting any.
Are you having trouble getting into the airport in Dublin? Because they have some great whiskies there.
They have a huge wall. You know, we're not in the airport. We're not in there yet. We're in Shannon Airport, which is my local airport. And I really wanted to support my own local airport because we're super local, so I focused on that. We don't have a huge amount of liquid. It can be quite difficult to feed the kind of demand that's coming out of the airports. But we have a couple of special releases coming up that they're going to take.
So what's your latest bureaucratic nightmare dealing with the government?
Oh, God. Okay, so the latest bureaucratic nightmare is they've just passed the craft drinks bill, which allows you to sell alcohol on site to nice people who visit you. I am not covered by that, unfortunately, because they don't consider blending to be production on site. I've just built the blending room. We're doing everything on site. So technically I can't sell my alcohol. I'm going to get a compounder's license, and I'm going to make 4 cases of compound gin per year, probably, and that will allow me to sell everything else from the front door, basically. So it's a loophole. I don't want to make gin, but I'm going to make literally 5 cases a year, but it'll allow us to do cellar door sales, essentially. The biggest nightmare, of course, is that we now have cancer warning labels on all whiskey products in Ireland, so that's not going to be pleasant moving forward at all. It's a disaster, actually.
Basically, they gave you something with the craft spirits bill, and then they took it away with the public health bill.
Yes, they gave us a wonderful craft drinks bill that would allow us to, bring tourists in and share our whiskey, and then with the health bill they took away our capability of advertising our tourist centres because we're not allowed to have any signage or anything. So they gave with one hand and took away with the other. The Irish government has a very schizophrenic attitude to the burgeoning Irish whiskey scene. They love it, they want to support it, but there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions from the health perspective which are, I think, misguided.
You don't hold back, do you?
I don't hold back, but, I'm for positive agitation, Mark. I feel, everything that I do is transparent. Our whiskey is transparent. I tell it like it is, but I in the most positive and best meaning way for the category as a whole.
I really don't want to get you and Mark Rainier together because you two could wreak havoc on the entire industry.
Yeah, Mark and I have exchanged a few emails over time. I'm all for what Mark is doing. I think he's going to put a bomb in the middle of everything when he does finally kind of come out. So we haven't actually gotten in a room together, but I look forward to that day.
Of course, the former Bruichladdich managing director is now running Waterford Distillery in Ireland, and he's also busy working on a rum project in the Caribbean, too. Waterford's first single malt release is still a few years away, And Chapel Gate has several more whiskeys in the works right now. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay Single Malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distillers Edition, the Throwback 8-year-old, and this year's annual release of the Cask Strength Lagavulin 12-year-old at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. And let's start off with the J.J. Corry Flintlock 16-year-old single malt, which Louise McGuane told me was distilled at Bushmills. And since I shared my tasting notes for the Bushmills distillery bottling of a 16-year-old single malt last time around, this is a good way to compare the two. The Flintlock comes from just 3 casks blended together and is bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is sweet and floral, with notes of freshly cut grass, a hint of lemon zest, soft spices, and a nice maltiness. The taste starts off with barley sugar and honey sweetness at first, followed by a good burst of allspice and ginger root, along with lemon zest and just a hint of vanilla. The finish is nice and long with touches of spice that last and last without overpowering the sweeter notes underneath for a very nice balance. I'm scoring the J.J. Corry Flintlock Single Malt from the Chapel Gate Whiskey Company a 92. Now, earlier this month, we reported on Kilbeggan's launch of its small batch rye Irish whiskey, and I received a sample the other day. It's bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose has notes of dark fruits, subtle baking spices, molasses, vanilla, and just a hint of coconut. The taste starts off with a touch of shortbread cookies, followed by allspice, dried fruits, and a nice oakiness. The finish is long with touches of spices and dried fruits, and I'm scoring the Kilbeggan Small Batch Rye Irish Whiskey a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, family-owned from the start, and proud to work with other family-owned companies on the Grain to Glass project. They're working with Beck's Hybrid and Peterson Farms to find unique seeds, grow them, and then distill them into a special whiskey. Follow the project at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. It's not often that I get to try one of the Last Drop's releases, let alone 2. But I was able to do just that this week. First off, Tom's Blend number 1. And yes, I do realize that it's not available for sale, but it's too good not to share. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has notes of hazelnut, creme brulee, toffee, honey, molasses, and just the barest sense of any spiciness. The taste is vibrant, fruity, and luscious with tropical fruits, hints of spice, a soft oakiness, and a touch of dried flowers in the background. The balance on this one is amazing, and the finish dances on the tongue with touches of fruit and spice. It's a great whiskey, and I'm scoring Tom's Blend number 1 from the Last Drop Distillers a 97. The Last Drop's 1971 blend that Rebecca Jago also told us about is still available at 3,000 pounds a bottle. That's about $3,850 US. It's bottled at 46.7% ABV, and the nose has a soft oakiness, along with notes of honey, sandalwood, freshly polished wood, and cooked fruits. The taste is spicy, aromatic, and mouth-filling, with a great complexity. Clove, cardamom, and allspice notes are balanced out nicely by heather, berry cobbler, and honey. The finish is long, and longer, with a great balance of gentle spices, fruits, and oak. I'm scoring the Last Drop 1971 Blended Scotch Whiskey a 97. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,300 different whiskeys from around the world. You'll find it at WhiskyCast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. It's brought to you by Lot 40. Last time around, I asked you to share some ideas for what you do with empty whiskey bottles after Tim Marr of Washington, D.C. told us that he'd love to find a way to put his empties to use instead of sending them off for recycling. Doug Burton of Lexington, Kentucky, at bourbon_racer on Twitter, sent us a photo along with this tweet. Finished the Willet Whiskey Pot Still Reserve. Bottle has a second life. Pancake syrup dispenser. Of course, the Willet Pot Still Reserve comes in a bottle shaped like a pot still, and that really wide bottom means it's probably pretty hard to tip that over, and it means you don't have to clean up any maple syrup. Chris Dickens of Canada tweeted a couple of photos of lamps he's made with empty bottles, including a Delmore lamp that, if I'm reading the photo correctly, he used the cork stopper for the light switch on the base. It's very creative work, and extra credit to Chris for the vintage-styled bulb. Brian Lapina sent this email from Virginia. Mark, I never throw out my empty bottles. I repurpose them. Instead of giving the boring bottle of wine as a gift when someone invites you to their house, I fill an empty with a special cocktail I make and replace the old label with one of my own creation. I use graphics design tools to come up with something that matches the host or the occasion. Some of my favorites are attached, and you'll have to describe them to the listening audience as you read this email. Please feel free to post these images online as well. He had things like the rarest of all Pappies, Pappy Van Danforth, with Mr. Danforth's picture substituted in for Pappy Van Winkle. A Super Bowl bottle with Eagles on one side and Patriots on the other. And he also sent along the long-playing marriage bottle in honor of the 33 1/3 anniversary his wife and he recently celebrated. As he puts it, our son had us over for dinner at his place where we played our old vinyl records with him and his girlfriend. I had an old photo of my wife and I having dinner with another couple when we were young. I superimposed the faces of my son and his girlfriend on the other couple, creating a unique time travel moment with the caption, Young Love. I encourage you and your followers to steal this idea. I've done about 100 of these, and they always get a great reaction. Brian, that is a great idea, and very generous, too. Thanks to everyone for all of the suggestions, and keep them coming. Now, when the news broke Friday about Powers 3 Swallow coming to the U.S., I mentioned on Twitter that I've been bugging the folks at Irish Distillers for the last 3 years or so to start exporting it. And Peter Dahmen tweeted this. That's in the wrong direction. The Netherlands are in the east of you. Well, Peter, we have to start somewhere, don't we? We do have a brand new episode now of the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel available to download. I met up with the members of the Monmouth Whiskey Club the other night in northern New Jersey to taste some bottled-in-bond bourbons. And they tweeted this weekend, "Thanks for having the club on WhiskyCast. We all had a blast." As did I, guys. And you can listen to it now. You'll find the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast on all of the same apps where you find WhiskyCast, and of course at WhiskyCast.com. On another note, our thoughts are with the people in Pittsburgh after Saturday's mass shooting at a synagogue that left 11 people dead and many more wounded. We got a tweet from the Pittsburgh Whiskey Friends Club on Saturday evening. It is a sad day here, but the community has really come together to support all those affected by this. They invited us to come to Pittsburgh and record a tasting panel episode with their club. We're going to see what we can do to make that happen soon. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us online. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. You can also email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Whiskey gets sold around the world in a lot of forms, and purists may cringe at the thought, but in a lot of places, so-called ready-to-drink cans of whiskey mixed with cola are very popular. For instance, Jack Daniel's cans are a staple in Australia, but since they're relatively cheap, some people might be suspicious and wonder if that's really Jack Daniel's whiskey in the can, or whether someone in Australia just licensed the brand name. So, I asked Jack Daniel's master distiller Jeff Arnett recently to explain the process.
They sell over 3 million cases of Jack and Cola that are like done in a premix, and that's actual Jack Daniel's whiskey, and it's one of their local colas. But we cannot produce that in Lynchburg and ship it all the way to Australia and make it affordable to purchase. So we have a partner, actually on both coasts of Australia, that can accept tanker shipments from us. So this would be thousands of gallons of our mature whiskey being sent into them, and then they can unload that into one of their tanks, and then they will go ahead and do the final mixing and canning and bottling and things. So, if you're in Australia, for instance, you pick up a Jack and Cola, that's real Jack Daniel's whiskey, made and matured by us in Lynchburg, but it has been produced, the final assembly and ingredients and everything have actually happened right there in country. So we have a partner like that in Mexico. Mexico, for us, when I became master distiller 10 years ago, was not even in our top 20 countries, and today it's inside the top 10. And that has largely become because we can get Jack Daniel's more affordable and into people's hands in a ready-to-drink format. So we have a tequila brand that we purchased down in Amatitan, Mexico, and one of the assets that we picked up was that they had a canning operation. So they can bring in our Jack Daniel's, do the rest, and deliver it to market, and it's become a way for us, like I said, to get more Jack Daniel's into more people's hands at a more affordable price point. So, that's a win for everyone.
I have this picture in my mind of a big super tanker, the SS Gentleman Jack or something like that, with a shipload, and emphasizing shipload, of Jack Daniel's going to various ports around the world, but that's not quite how this works.
Well, what we'll do is we have a tanker company that provides us with kosher, wash, certified, clean tanker vessels that we can load with our whiskey, and ultimately those will get sealed up. So they'll have an actual locking seal on them that has a number, and if that thing gets removed, then we'll assume that something's been adulterated. But it guarantees the integrity of the whiskey from us until it arrives at the person who's going to finish it for us. But yeah, ultimately you have thousands of gallons of whiskey on ships going through the ocean at any given time. I want to say for Jack Daniel's, at least maybe 20 times a month we're loading up a tanker that's going to be going to one of the countries, ultimately to be produced into a ready-to-drink type of product for that country.
And none of these tankers has ever disappeared.
Yes. I mean, we've had whole whiskey shipments disappear before. We've had where trucks have left our property. They've gone up and unhooked on drop lots, and normally these trailers are unmarked and people would know what's in them. But there have been times that obviously people had traced the truck up there and they hooked up to it and pulled it away. So. We're insured for a lot of those types of things, and it's very rare for that to happen. I've been with Jack Daniel's now for 17 years, and I can count, at less than one hand, the times that people have actually ever been able to get their hands and swipe a shipment in transit.
And especially not on the high seas, right?
Well, I guess you get into international waters, that could get you into worse trouble, or maybe there's no laws out there at all based on where exactly you are on the globe. But, I think it's like if you do things, you send it through the mail, it changes it changes the level of seriousness of it when you involve federal agencies and stuff like that. Most shipments are being monitored by agencies that have a lot of power, and I'm not sure if I were looking to steal something, I would be stealing it from there.
You'd hijack a ship on the high seas. The Jack Daniel's label does sort of look like a pirate flag in some ways.
Yeah, I've seen. I took a BVI cruise not that long ago, and I put the Jack Daniel's flag up. But I think it kind of looked like the skull and crossbones black flags of a lot of the other ships when it was flapping in the wind. You couldn't really tell if it was a Jack Daniel's labeled flag or something more pirate based.
Jack Daniel's is not the only brand that does this. Jim Beam sells those so-called ready-to-drink cans around the world too, along with a few other brands. Just about the only whiskeys you will never see sold like that are single malt Scotch whiskies, since UK law makes it illegal to ship single malt Scotch whiskies outside of Scotland in any form other than a bottle labeled for retail sale. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is presented by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com, along with links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, events, tasting notes, and much more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes going back to 2005. Please share WhiskyCast this week with your friends. Tell them about the show, and if they're not familiar with podcasts, show them how to use the podcast app on their smartphone to discover a whole world of free content. And while you're at it, I hope you'll leave a review or rating for WhiskyCast wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week, usually from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.